Okay, let me go back to the summer because I'm not sure. I don't think these two films made your book because I'm still tearing through it, but I don't think it was. It was the summer of Barbenheimer. And I think those
Yeah.
two films kind of encapsulate some of the things you were saying in the book. Because on one side, I think you mentioned how Mattel was jealous of Hasbro because they didn't have a
Oh yeah.
movie like Transformers. So with Barbie, as big as it was, they had their movie for merchandise. And then the other side, you have Chris Nolan with Oppenheimer, which has nothing to do with merchandising, but it's his brand of being a director that
Yeah.
made that also a hit. So you have two opposite things, two opposite poles when it comes to filmmaking, and they both made money in different ways.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. So, the book, I had to, it was at the printer in the spring, so it was not possible to get Barbenheimer in there. But I loved watching that phenomenon take place because you're right. I think it just kind of shows that there's two different ways sometimes that one can make a successful film. With Barbie, it's interesting because, Barbie, there's been a ton of Barbie movies. They were all just terrible. Like, they were all like computer generated, designed to just kind of come out direct to DVD. I'm sure that there was some creative merit in them. At some point, I don't want to dismiss them entirely, but like Mattel had been trying to make films to juice interest in Barbie for quite some time. And I think that the smart decision that they made was finding someone as talented as Greta Gerwig and someone as talented as Margot Robbie to come in and sign on to the project and gave them really fairly wide creative control over what they were able to do. If I recall correctly, a Mattel executive is shot with an arrow in one scene, so you have to kind of respect the leash that they were able to kind of give the creators on this kind of stuff, and that just paid off in spades. I think that they had a long running institution. The other film that you didn't mention, just because it wasn't actually in this duel, but it is totally of the same kind, is the Super Mario Brothers movie, which is going to be the third highest grossing film of the year, if not the second. A little bit, I don't recall totally exactly where it stands, but that is another example of this is a company that kept its powder dry, found creative collaborators that they knew would really do justice to these products, and it's going to be a phenomenon. They're now launching an entire slate of Nintendo adaptations, animated and otherwise. But to the Oppenheimer point, I think that the thing that I really loved about that film is, so there's again in a chapter of the book that we've actually spent a lot of this time, which is about the commerce and culture and pop culture and all that, is that there's a bias in the movie industry that affects what gets made. There's this perception that movies, that the only thing that Hollywood is interested in is profits, and that is understandable why people might think that, but it's misguided. It's not right. That is not the top priority of Hollywood. The top priority of Hollywood is not to make money. The top priority of Hollywood is to not lose money, and as a result, you get films that are safer bets. That's why we see an abundance of sequels, an abundance of franchises. When we do get original films, they're oftentimes reboots of things from the 70s or 80s or 90s. And that's primarily because, if you make a movie and you release it and it makes back its budget and then a little bit more on top, then you don't lose your job. If you take a risk and you make something that people might not see at all and it bombs, then you might lose your job. And so there's a structural incentive in the industry to only create things that are based on pre-existing intellectual property or sequels or whatnot. Now, the thing that I love about Oppenheimer is that there's a class of director and a class of studio. You can see things like, from the studio side, you see things like Studio Ghibli, you see things like Pixar, you see things like A24. And on the director side, you see guys like M. Night Shyamalan, you see guys like Christopher Nolan, you see guys like Quentin Tarantino. And they're able to sell a movie on their name alone. They're essentially making themselves into the franchise, into the pre-existing known quantity. And as a result, they're able to make new movies and original ideas on a level and reliability that very few other people are. And that, I think, is a really exciting thing to see. And it was so exciting to see it succeed on the level that it did, just because I think that it's got to remind the industry that, listen, you don't have to just have the same idea. You don't have to reboot things that have happened before. If you develop and bolster and build out talented people, that can be the franchise for you. People will show up to a cinema to see Christopher Nolan films, even if they have a guy like Cillian Murphy, who's obviously not the biggest name in the world. He's been in a lot of major films, but I don't think before Oppenheimer it would have been a total safe bet to describe him as a leading man who could open a film, to the extent that he absolutely did. And I think that it has to remind them that you're allowed to make your own stars and make your own luck and make your own auteurs.
Right. You